Callum Knuckles, Brereton, Faye Kavanagh, and Soraya Evers weren't just Liverpool's most feared criminals. They were the architects of a global empire built on cocaine, cash and guns. From shadowed backstreets to European ports, their network moved with ruthless precision, leaving law enforcement scrambling and rivals trembling. This is the story of the Scouse Connection, how a city known for its docks and football became the nerve center of one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations the world has ever seen. Liverpool, the city, was a restless maze of brick buildings, narrow alleyways and foggy streets that seemed to whisper secrets to anyone who dared to listen. By day the docks were a place of commerce, with cranes lifting containers and workers hauling crates. But by night the shadows held a different kind of activity. In the backstreets of Kirkdale and Anfield, a new breed of criminal was rising, one that didn't just survive in the chaos, but thrived on it. At the center of it all was Callum Knuckles Brereton, a man whose reputation for both intelligence and brutality was growing faster than the rumors that followed him. He wasn't a man who sought attention. He let his actions speak, but those actions were enough to make the entire underworld take notice. Callum's rise began in the smaller corners of the city. Unlike the old gangs that relied on brute force alone, he had a mind for strategy, for connecting seemingly random threads into a web of influence that stretched across Liverpool. He started by taking over local protection rackets, ensuring that shops, pubs and warehouses paid for security that only he could provide. But protection was only the beginning. He expanded into illegal gambling dens, where people came to test their luck, often leaving more than they could afford. These were controlled operations, each one carefully monitored and managed, with Derek Scythe Malone, a former boxer with a reputation for handling anyone who didn't pay, enforcing the rule. Then there was Faye Kavanagh, whose skills were less obvious but equally vital. She moved through the city like a ghost, slipping in and out of places unnoticed, gathering information and tracking rival movements. While others relied on intimidation, Faye relied on observation, and together with Callum and Derek, the trio became unstoppable. Their combination of brains, brawn and stealth allowed them to dominate the streets in a way that hadn't been seen before in Liverpool. But Callum had bigger ambitions. He began eyeing the docks with a strategic mind, seeing them not as a place to hide petty thefts, but as gateways to the wider world. It wasn't long before he realized that cargo shipments offered opportunities far beyond local rackets. One evening, a shipment of rare electronics bound for Rotterdam went missing, and instead of panicking, Callum saw the potential. If stolen goods could be moved across borders, why not other, more lucrative commodities? That single incident planted the seed for a vision that would transform Liverpool's criminal underworld forever. The early stages of this plan weren't without risk. Rival gangs saw the rising influence of Callum's group as a threat, and violent clashes were inevitable. Skirmishes in narrow alleyways and abandoned warehouses became commonplace, leaving scars on both the streets and the city's psyche. Yet, every confrontation only strengthened the gang, solidifying their reputation for ruthless efficiency. Callum understood that fear was a tool, but fear paired with precision was power. As the group's influence grew, the people of Liverpool began to whisper about the Scouse Connection. Though few understood its full scope, Callum maintained an almost surgical approach to expansion, carefully choosing alliances and eliminating weaknesses. The streets under his control became well-organized territories, with systems for extortion, smuggling, and enforcement that mimicked legitimate business operations. While the public saw only the occasional street fight or robbery, behind the scenes, a complex network was forming, one that would soon stretch far beyond the city limits. The defining moment came when Callum successfully orchestrated a series of small but highly coordinated heists along the docks, moving stolen goods with precision and avoiding police detection. These operations were a clear demonstration Liverpool's backstreets could be more than local crime zones. They could be the starting point for an international criminal network. And it was in that realization, standing in the dim glow of dockside lamplight, that Callum Brereton truly understood the potential of the empire he was building. Liverpool was no longer just a city, it was the foundation of something far larger, and the world would soon learn that the Scouse Connection was not to be underestimated. By 2002, Callum Brereton's ambitions had outgrown Liverpool. The docks, the backstreets, and even the city's most dangerous corners were now under his control. But he saw a larger horizon, Europe. Callum understood that to grow, his network needed connections beyond Britain, and that meant forging alliances with people who had influence and reach in ports like Rotterdam, Antwerp, and beyond. It was during this period that Luciano the Fox Ventresca entered the picture, an Italian fixer with a reputation for smoothing deals others thought impossible. Luciano wasn't a man to be trusted lightly, but his network of contacts across Europe's criminal underworld was too valuable to ignore. The alliance began cautiously. Callum sent Derek Malone and Faye Kavanagh to vet Luciano's operations, watching how he negotiated, how he moved shipments, and how he handled double crosses. It became clear that Luciano had a talent for logistics that rivaled even Callum's strategic mind. By combining their strengths, the Liverpool gang could move cocaine from Rotterdam into Britain without attracting attention. What began as small-scale shipments quickly escalated into a pipeline capable of handling tons of cocaine annually, all hidden beneath legitimate exports. But no empire grows without friction. In the spring of 2003, Soraya Evers, financial prodigy Callum, had recruited for her skill with numbers and secrecy, discovered discrepancies in the accounting. Shipments marked as delivered were not arriving, and invoices were being manipulated. At first it seemed like simple bookkeeping errors, but as she traced the money flow, the truth became chilling. One of Callum's trusted lieutenants, Derek Malone, had been skimming profits and funneling money to the European partners behind the scenes. The betrayal struck hard. Derek was more than muscle. He was supposed to be loyal to the point of death. Callum's reaction was precise and terrifying. Derek vanished from Liverpool within days, leaving no trace, sending a silent but clear message to anyone who might consider betrayal. The streets buzzed with rumors of what had happened, but no one dared ask. Callum had established that loyalty was mandatory, and efficiency was expected. This calculated response didn't just secure the cocaine pipeline, it reinforced the fear and respect that made Liverpool's gangsters legendary. Meanwhile, the network was growing more complex. Faye Kavanagh, ever the observer, noticed patterns in port inspections, customs reports, and even shipping schedules. The gang's operations weren't relying on force alone, they relied on intelligence, timing, and misdirection. They had turned logistical precision into an art form, making it nearly impossible for authorities to catch them unprepared. Each shipment, each container, was a puzzle piece in a larger, meticulously organized system. Yet, even as their European influence grew, danger lurked in unexpected corners. Rival gangs from Rotterdam and Antwerp were watching, hungry for a share of the profits, and beyond them, law enforcement agencies across multiple countries were beginning to notice anomalies in import records and bank transfers. Detective Henrik Solberg in Norway had already begun connecting dots that led back to Liverpool, though the network's secrecy made his task daunting. By the end of 2003, the Scouse Connection had transformed from a city gang into an international enterprise. What began with stolen electronics and local intimidation now involved transnational cocaine pipelines, intricate money flows, and alliances that spanned multiple countries. But the most unsettling revelation was that the network had the power to outsmart both rivals and law enforcement with equal efficiency. Each member had a role, and every operation was executed with precision, leaving little room for error. Liverpool, once a city defined by its docks and working-class grit, had become the nerve center of a global criminal network. From the backstreets of Anfield to the ports of Rotterdam, the Scouse Connection's reach was growing at an alarming pace. By combining ambition, intelligence, and ruthless enforcement, Callum Brereton and his team were redefining what it meant to be organized criminals in the 20s. And as Europe began to take notice, it was clear that this network was no longer a local threat. It was a force capable of shaking the continent's criminal and legal structures alike. If you like, I can continue with Chapter 3 expanded to a similar 650-word length, diving into the money laundering operations and the tension with law enforcement. This is where the story really deepens globally and financially. With cocaine flowing steadily across Europe and into Liverpool, the Scouse Connection faced a new challenge. What to do with the money? Tons of cash could not simply sit in warehouses or be funneled directly into banks without attracting attention. That's when Soraya Evers became indispensable. Gifted with an uncanny ability to trace, manipulate and hide money, she transformed the gang's financial chaos into an invisible, efficient system. Where others saw stacks of cash, Soraya saw opportunity. Nightclubs, import-export firms, high-end car dealerships. Every legitimate business became a facade for laundering millions. Soraya's approach was meticulous. Each transaction, each investment was carefully planned to avoid scrutiny. She created layers upon layers of accounts, shell companies, and offshore entities, each designed to obscure the origin of the funds. But even with her genius, the web of money was complex, and mistakes could be catastrophic. One misstep might trigger audits, investigations, or worse, tip off rival gangs. Yet, for Soraya, the challenge only sharpened her focus. She began to see patterns in law enforcement behavior, predicting inspections, audits, and even undercover operations. In a way, she was always several steps ahead of those trying to catch them. Detective Henrik Solberg, however, was persistent. The Norwegian investigator had been following the network across Europe for years, connecting Liverpool shipments to seemingly unrelated bank transfers and properties in Switzerland, Spain and the Netherlands. He noticed action thrived. Each financial maneuver strengthened their reputation for precision and ruthlessness, ensuring that both criminals and law enforcement feared them equally. By turning money into an instrument of power, Callum and his team not only enriched themselves, but also solidified their global reach. Liverpool was no longer just a city with backstreets and docks. It was a hub through which money, drugs and influence flowed across continents. By the end of this chapter in the network story, the stakes were clear. Failure meant exposure, imprisonment, or death. But success meant control over a global criminal empire. The tension between law enforcement and the Scouse Connection had become a high-stakes chess game, with every move calculated, every risk measured, and every player aware that a single misstep could be fatal. And in the midst of it all, Soraya Evers had become the invisible hand guiding the financial machinery, proving that brains could be just as dangerous as brawn in the world of organized crime. By 2007, the Scouse Connection had reached a level of power few could imagine. Cocaine pipelines and financial networks had solidified their reach across Europe, but Callum Brereton knew that diversification was essential. Drugs alone were risky, markets fluctuated, law enforcement intensified, and rivals always. The next frontier was arms trafficking, a dangerous but highly lucrative venture. Callum had already made preliminary contacts through Luciano Ventresca in southern Europe, but he needed someone with real operational experience. Enter Igor Petrov, a former Eastern European soldier whose reputation for precision and ruthlessness made him the perfect partner. Igor's introduction changed the network entirely. Weapons shipments from handguns to high-powered rifles began moving quietly through Liverpool warehouses and onto Mediterranean ports. Callum's network applied the same precision to arms trafficking that it had to cocaine. Every shipment was logged, coded, and concealed within legitimate cargo. Faye Kavanagh became instrumental in scouting routes and coordinating pickups. Her uncanny ability to remain unseen now a critical tool in avoiding authorities and rival gangs. But the expansion into arms also brought a new layer of paranoia. Igor was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. Within months, Faye noticed subtle inconsistencies in his movements. Unauthorized communications, unexplained delays and whispers from dock workers who had been paid to watch the shipments. What she uncovered was a betrayal, Igor intended to seize control of a major weapons shipment, effectively hijacking it from Callum's network for his own profit. The revelation shocked the gang. Unlike previous threats, this one came from inside the system, from someone who had been entrusted with their most dangerous operation. Faye acted swiftly, using the betrayal to her advantage without alerting Igor. She provided selective intelligence to Callum, enabling him to intercept the shipment at the right moment. When Igor arrived at the docks expecting control, he found the operation already under Callum's command. The resulting confrontation was brief and brutal. Igor disappeared from the network, leaving only fear in his wake. His disappearance served as another warning. The Scouse Connection tolerated no insubordination, no matter how skilled or influential the traitor. This chapter in the gang's history revealed the duality of their operation. Expansion brought wealth and influence, but it also magnified risk. Every success had to be balanced with vigilance, and every ally was also a potential threat. Callum's leadership became less about brute force and more about orchestration. He relied on the precision of his lieutenants, the intelligence of Faye, and the financial acumen of Soraya to maintain control. The Scouse Connection had become more than a criminal enterprise. It was a complex machine with cogs that had to operate in perfect harmony. The expansion into arms also attracted international attention. Interpol and Europol began noticing patterns. Liverpool warehouses linked to Mediterranean ports, suspicious shipping manifests, and unexplained financial flows. Detective Henrik Solberg, whose investigations had been hindered for years, now saw opportunities to connect the dots. Every shipment, every transaction, every subtle pattern added to the growing case that Liverpool's gangsters were no longer local criminals but players on a global stage. Despite the looming threat of law enforcement, the Scouse Connection continued to operate with ruthless efficiency. Each member understood the stakes. Failure could mean imprisonment, loss of fortune, or death. Yet this pressure only strengthened their reputation. Stories of Liverpool gangsters moving tons of weapons, evading capture, and punishing betrayal spread throughout Europe. The network's reach and precision became legendary, instilling fear in rivals and respect even among law-abiding citizens who only caught glimpses of their influence. By the end of 2007, the Scouse Connection was no longer simply a criminal organization. It was a global operation. Cocaine, money laundering, and arms trafficking intertwined into a network that spanned cities and borders. Callum's leadership, combined with Faye's stealth, Soraya's intellect, and a careful selection of allies, had created an empire that seemed almost untouchable. Yet, lurking beneath the surface, the tension between loyalty and ambition, secrecy and betrayal, was a constant reminder that in this world, no empire was ever truly safe. By 2015, the Scouse Connection had reached the apex of its power. From the backstreets of Liverpool to ports across Europe, Callum Brereton's empire controlled cocaine pipelines, money laundering networks, and arms trafficking operations with ruthless precision. The gang was feared, respected, and seemingly untouchable. Yet, with power came vulnerability. International law enforcement had intensified their efforts, connecting intelligence across borders, and the web of secrecy that had protected the network for over a decade was beginning to show cracks. Detective Henrik Solberg, relentless in his pursuit, had amassed a dossier of unprecedented scope. By now, he had traced financial flows, monitored shipments, and identified key players across Europe. Interpol was finally ready to act. Solberg's strategy was meticulous. Dismantle the network piece by piece without alarming the kingpin himself. But in the shadows of Liverpool, loyalty and cunning remained powerful shields. Callum's team had weathered betrayals, rivalries, and near discoveries before. They were not about to crumble under pressure, not without a fight. Soraya Evers, who had once been the invisible hand behind the financial machinery, faced an impossible choice. She understood that if the authorities succeeded, the consequences would be catastrophic. Long prison sentences, loss of wealth, and the inevitable collapse of the empire she had helped build. Yet her loyalty to Callum was tested like never before. Solberg had reached out with discreet offers, hinting that cooperation could secure her freedom. The tension was unbearable. One wrong move could expose the entire operation. Meanwhile, Faye Kavanagh, now even more integral to operations, sensed that something had shifted in the atmosphere. Patterns that had once been predictable, shipments, routes, communications, suddenly carried a hint of risk. She observed the docks with a careful eye, noting unusual customs inspections and unexpected port delays. The network's muscle, previously unmatched, now felt the creeping pressure of a global law enforcement net tightening. The final twist came when Callum revealed that he had anticipated this moment for years. Long before Solberg's Kamen reached its full force, he had prepared escape routes, falsified documents, and offshore identities. While his lieutenants prepared for confrontation, he quietly orchestrated a move that would leave him beyond the reach of law enforcement. Within days, he vanished from Liverpool, leaving no trace except for a carefully crafted illusion of his continued presence. What remained was a city and a network without its mastermind. Soraya and Faye assumed control, maintaining the operations with precision, but the balance of power had shifted. Callum's disappearance was not defeat, it was a calculated preservation of his freedom and legacy. The gang continued to function, proving that the Scouse Connection was more than a single leader. It was a machine designed to survive beyond individuals. Detective Solberg, finally piecing together Callum's absence, realized the brilliance of the strategy. The network remained intact, yet the most dangerous element had disappeared. The investigation continued. Arrests were made, and shipments were seized, but the empire's foundations endured. Liverpool's backstreets, once simply a stage for local crime, had become the epicenter of an organization that could manipulate international markets, finance and arms trades with astonishing efficiency. In the final reckoning, the Scouse Connection stood as both a cautionary tale and a testament to ambition. Callum Brereton had created not merely a criminal enterprise, but a global network that defied conventional law enforcement. Faye and Soraya, continuing operations, showed that even in the absence of the leader, the system could function. The city of Liverpool, its docks, alleys and warehouses, had been forever imprinted with the reach of its most dangerous and clever criminal minds. The story of the Scouse Connection was not one of absolute triumph or total defeat. It was a story of intelligence, ruthlessness, and adaptation, of how a small city's backstreets could connect to the world's most dangerous networks, and how loyalty, cunning, and strategy could shape an empire that even the law struggled to contain. And in the quiet corners of Liverpool, whispers of the gang continued, reminding everyone that the Scouse Connection's legacy was far from over.